I never imagined someone could build $100 million empire, only to realize she'd been sharing her life and her home with a traitor. But before everything unraveled, there was once an Ellie who believed that intelligence was the one thing no one could ever steal. My name is Ellie Harper, 35 years old, living in Boston. Today, people in the finance world call me the queen of cybersecurity. But few know that I started out in a modest neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, where at night, you'd hear more police sirens than laughter. My parents were public school teachers, people who believed the greatest inheritance they could pass on to their daughter was resilience and knowledge. Every night, in a tiny kitchen just big enough for a table, my dad used to say, "Your mind is the one asset no one can ever seize, Ellie." I didn't fully understand back then, but that sentence stayed with me, deep and permanent. While other kids folded paper stars or doodled in notebooks, I was obsessed with cracking old video games, rewriting code to make them run my way. At 13, I built a firewall to keep nosy neighbors out of our home Wi-Fi. Nobody quite got what I was doing, but my dad let me turn the garage into a command center, full of wires, processors, and hand-drawn diagrams taped to the walls. 4 years later, I earned a full scholarship to MIT, double majoring in computer science and business. I didn't go home during my first year, not because I forgot, but because I had finally found what I'd been craving. A world where I wasn't underestimated for being a girl who loved tech. Graduating summa cum laude at 22, I got offers from 3 major players: a national security agency, a retail tech giant, and a top investment bank in New York. I turned them all down. In one of my final classes at MIT, I had spotted a critical flaw in the cybersecurity systems used by thousands of small businesses, a vulnerability no one seemed to care about. I knew if I didn't fix it, someone else would exploit it. I'd borrowed $60,000 from my parents' retirement savings, the only nest egg they'd ever built, and rented a run-down apartment in South Boston to get started. I named the company Hexashield because in geometry, a hexagon is the most stable structure. My goal was clear. If I did this right, companies would trust me to protect their data the way hexagons protect a beehive. The first 3 years were exhausting. I worked 18-hour days, survived on instant noodles and coffee. Sometimes I passed out at my desk, waking up to find lines of test code still running. I knocked on more than 70 office doors pitching my idea, usually getting polite refusals or smirks. "Are you really the founder? Is there a lead engineer we can speak with?" We were hoping to talk to the head of tech. I was the head of tech. I was the founder. I wrote every line of that code. But all they saw was a young woman, no designer suit, no booming voice of authority. Then everything changed overnight. A large regional bank suffered a major data breach. Hundreds of thousands of customer records sold on the dark web. 6 months earlier, I had pitched them a security solution. They'd passed. The next morning, their head of security called me. "Ellie, can you save us?" I didn't answer right away. I just resent the original proposal, with one subject line, "Still in time. If you listen now." Within a month, Hexashield was active in 5 banks, then spread to insurance firms, health startups, and data platforms. Our 3-person team, me, a college friend who coded, and my cousin who did the books, grew to 200 employees within a year. At 30, I was on the cover of Forbes. When asked my secret to success, I said simply, "People may not believe in you. As long as you believe in yourself, you'll still reach the finish line. Before they do." Then I met Ethan. But that's a different story, one that never followed logic or planning. It happened at a spring charity gala for victims of online scams. I wasn't one for those events, but a friend had invited me to speak on personal financial security. I didn't expect anything beyond the speech, a few polite clinks of glasses, and an early exit. Ethan stood by the bar in a charcoal suit, wearing a simple vintage watch. He didn't crowd me like others did when they recognized my name. Instead, he raised his glass and said, Your speech made me realize my home printer might be a national security threat. I laughed. If it's on Wi-Fi, it just might be. Guess I should toss it, he replied, eyes steady. I'm Ethan. I'm a divorce attorney. Means I specialize in endings. I raised an eyebrow. That's a pretty unusual way to start small talk at a romantic gala. At least I'm honest, he shrugged. But I didn't come here tonight to talk about endings. I came to learn how people protect what they value. That line, the way he didn't try to act smart, didn't circle around my net worth like so many had, made me pause. Ethan never asked how much I made, never brought up HexaShield's valuation, never pretended to care about algorithms or shares. Instead, he asked what I thought about machines understanding people more and people understanding each other less. We talked for over an hour, between candlelight tables and soft violins. As I left, he said, I know you're busy, but if there's ever a night when you're not saving the digital world, let me take you to dinner. I didn't answer right away, but in my coat pocket I kept the soft matte business card, a name I had to Google, only to find out it belonged to one of the priciest divorce firms in New York. We had dinner a week later at a small Italian place in Brooklyn. No chandeliers, no waiters in tuxedos, just soft candlelight, warm lasagna, and a surprisingly calm conversation. Ethan told me he had once been engaged at 29 but called it off. He felt something wasn't real. I know life isn't about IQ scores or balance sheets, he said, but I've never met anyone who made me feel both of those things didn't matter at all. I smiled. Is that supposed to be a compliment? A warning, because I think I really want to know more about you. Ellie. We dated for 6 months. He didn't rush things. He didn't flinch when I had to fly to Zurich on short notice to fix a bank crisis. He sent goodnight messages, checked in on my parents even though he'd never met them, and let me choose when to open up. One morning, just as I landed from an early flight out of Singapore, he picked me up in a silver SUV. No flowers, no dramatic music, just a cup of coffee, exactly how I liked it, and a thin envelope. I opened it. It was 2 plane tickets to Vancouver and a scanned marriage license form, already filled out with our names. We can go big with a 3-tier cake or just bring a lawyer and 2 witnesses, he said, his eyes fixed on mine. As long as you say yes. I paused before replying. I just tugged gently at his sleeve, rested my head on his shoulder, and whispered, Then let's go. We had a quiet wedding at a lakeside wooden villa in Canada. Just a few close friends, my parents, and a sky full of stars. Ethan read his vows without notes or a script. I remember him saying, I won't promise I'll always understand you, because you're a complex operating system. But I promise I'll never stop trying to learn how you run. People say the first years of marriage are a honeymoon phase. To me, it felt more like a well-synced duet between 2 fiercely driven people. I continued running Sentinel Corps while he handled high-profile divorces in Manhattan. When I was tangled in a cybersecurity contract in Dubai, he helped break down the legal clauses. When he was threatened by a celebrity client, I triple encrypted all his personal data. We bought a sleek, modern home in the Hudson Valley. Quiet, misty, wrapped in forest. It gave us space to hear ourselves. Each year, we traveled to somewhere neither of us had been. Iceland, Kyoto, Civel, Patagonia. Not to show off, but to walk beside each other. At one point, I thought maybe I'd found something that only existed in simulations. A partner strong enough not to fear my success, discerning enough not to be swayed by it, and patient enough to walk beside me without trying to lead. But even the most advanced systems fail when corrupted by malicious code. What I didn't expect was that the first infected line of code lived in the eyes of the man I once believed truly loved me. The first cracks didn't come from fights. They came from silence. Ethan started coming home later, citing increasingly complex divorce cases. I didn't question him at first. In his field, midnight calls from clients weren't unusual. I kept my grueling schedule at Sentinel Corps, often flying to San Francisco to meet with the West Coast team. Still, no matter how busy I was, I noticed subtle shifts in our supposedly safe home. The white dress shirts Ethan used to wear to work barely made an appearance anymore. Instead, it was high-end shirts I'd never seen him buy, darker ties, stronger cologne. When I casually asked, he replied, "Just needed a change. Looks more polished for bigger clients." I wanted to believe him, but the tone was off. Then came the legal conferences in Philadelphia or Atlanta, places that had no public record of any such events, as far as I could verify. Ethan didn't know that years in cybersecurity had hardwired a reflex in me. When something doesn't align, I don't ask, I observe. Our 10th wedding anniversary approached. I planned a quiet dinner at a converted castle hotel in Vermont, the one we visited early in our marriage. I even commissioned a custom redesign of our wedding bands, embedding a deep blue sapphire he once said was the color of memory. Ethan seemed touched when I brought it up. "I've been looking forward to it," he said, squeezing my hand. But when I asked if we could take a longer trip, his eyes shifted. "Buck's tough. I've got a big case in Phoenix." Phoenix? I couldn't recall any of his clients being based there. I stayed quiet. The following week, I needed to review some financial documents for a Canadian investor pitch. My personal laptop was at the office, so I used our shared desktop in the home office. Ethan usually checked emails or printed legal forms there. The screen was still on, an email tab was open. I went to close it when a subject line made my hand freeze. Asset Tracing Report, E.H. Private Holdings. I had never heard of that firm, but the subheading below caught my eye: Tracking Movement of Offshore Funds Associated with EM Technologies. UP Technologies was the parent entity that held equity in Sentinel Corps. I had incorporated it 9 years ago, long before I even met Ethan. A chill ran through me. I clicked the email. Inside was a detailed report from an asset investigation firm headquartered in Belize, one of the most notorious jurisdictions for money laundering and financial anonymity. The report noted that accounts tied to me were being tracked due to their potentially high-value division during divorce proceedings. Divorce? I exited the email and opened the document folder. A file titled Case Draft 2023 PDP-PF sat there with a Microsoft Word icon. My heart pounded as I double-clicked it. At the top was the logo of the law firm Ethan worked with, and the header read, Petition for Divorce. Ethan Caldwell versus Ellie Harper. Date of creation, 3 months ago. The first line of the draft. The petitioner requests division of all co-founded companies and domestic and international investments, citing indirect legal support and significant influence on business growth throughout the marriage. I read in a daze. My hands trembled as I scrolled through appendices, listing every investment, every stake, every foreign subsidiary I'd discreetly established in Singapore, Toronto, and Zurich. Assets I thought only I and my senior executives knew, now mapped out in sharp detail. Part of me screamed, "This isn't real." But there was my name, my signature samples, my corporate ID numbers, along with a meticulously annotated portfolio. Right down to the undisclosed villa in Tuscany and the Japanese yen reserve account. That morning, I sat still for nearly 3 hours. My mind replayed everything. Ethan carefully replacing the batteries in the fingerprint scanner of our safe. Ethan volunteering to help organize my accounting files when I said I was exhausted. Ethan casually asking about Delaware corporate structures over ice cream. I thought it was care. It was control. I checked a subfolder. There were emails between Ethan and someone named S. Kramer, his personal assistant. The last line in one chain read, "She still doesn't know." The 10-year anniversary will be the ideal moment to move. The bank confirmed Phase 2 of the asset transfer can proceed a week after. I don't remember where I threw up. I only remember crawling to the bathroom, locking the door, and curling up on the freezing tile floor. The man who once held me beneath the falling snow in Vancouver, who used to read my unfinished poems scribbled in old notebooks, was now counting down the days to strip away everything I had spent a lifetime building. I sat there until sunrise. When I opened my eyes, something inside me had shifted. The pain didn't vanish, but within that ache, a new thought started to form. Sharp, deliberate, like a blade forged in darkness. Ethan thought this was a chess game, but he misjudged the queen, waiting quietly for her move. I left the office just as dawn broke. The face in the mirror wasn't the woman pinning up anniversary plans on the wall anymore. My eyes had darkened like still air before a storm. I didn't have time to hurt. The shock from the night before compressed into something precise. A different operating system kicking in. Assess, calculate, retaliate. First stop, Cameron Wolfe, Sentinel Corps' CFO and the only high school friend I still kept in touch with. Cameron lived in Cambridge, about a 40-minute drive from my place. I didn't call. I needed to meet in person, somewhere low profile. I waited for him at a vintage cafe tucked between Harvard's red brick buildings. When he walked in, his eyes scanned the room without recognition, until they landed on the silver USB drive clenched in my hand, the one I always wore around my neck. "What's going on?" he asked, voice lower, pulling out a chair. I didn't answer. I placed the USB on the table, clicked the cap off. "You need to see what's on this, but not here. I want full control of every recording device in that room." Cameron understood. 30 minutes later, we were inside Sentinel Corps' backup office. In a Medford complex, rarely used, no one had access to our schedule. The conference room had no surveillance, and the Wi-Fi was triple-layer encrypted. Perfectly secure. I opened the backup files from Ethan's computer. Cameron's expression tightened with every new document. Financial reports, legal emails, offshore transaction charts. "Jesus," he muttered. "He doesn't just want a divorce, he wants to gut you financially." "Exactly." I leaned back, spine pressing into the cold leather. "I need you to secure every company structure, trust fund, and subsidiary. Quietly, no sudden moves." Cameron nodded, but something in his face said he was holding back. "Ellie." A few weeks ago, I got an indirect request from a law firm asking for an audit of Sentinel Corps' offshore holdings. When I asked who it was for, the intermediary said it was part of a personal estate planning assessment. My fingers clenched. "Ethan!" Cameron opened a second browser tab. "That's not all. Internal security flags some after-hours data access from your home IP." Ice surged down my spine. "We didn't report it. Figured it was a system glitch." He paused. "But now I think there's spyware on your shared household devices." I tilted my head, remembering how my phone had been sluggish with financial apps lately. Our desktop lagged when entering passwords, even though it had top-tier specs. The sense of being watched, I'd brushed it off as stress. But now, everything made sense. "We need a full device audit, lock down old network credentials, but I don't want him knowing we're reacting," I said. Cameron's eyes narrowed. "You want a clean house, without a sound." "Not just clean. I want him to think everything is going exactly to plan." We brought in 3 more, a Boston-based independent attorney, a corporate legal strategist, and a senior security engineer from our development team. All communications were moved to newly encrypted devices stored in 3 separate locations. We operated like an internal leak response unit, only our threat was sleeping in my bed every night. Cameron built a virtual environment to mimic the old system, letting the spyware run undisturbed. The data it pulled was curated. Fake project drafts, false travel itineraries, baited emails with carefully worded misdirection. Meanwhile, every strategic asset, from subsidiary shares in Canada, pending IP rights in Germany, to dividends auto-certained into trust funds, was reviewed and relocated into safer legal structures, all traced back to my premarital ownership. I had our lawyers comb through every contract, flagging anything that might be deemed community property. Their response gave me a measure of relief. Most holdings are clearly personal, never merged or transferred. Even Will argue he contributed to their growth, the attorney warned. We'll need hard data to prove otherwise. I pulled out a performance analysis compiled by our independent auditors. Since 2017, every strategic decision was authorized by a board exclusive to Sentinel Corp. Eden was never involved in any advisory role. Perfect. That's where we start. I left the emergency office just before midnight, my mind thick with data but oddly alert. On the way home, I received a message from Ethan. Got us a reservation for Friday. Hope you like it. Can't believe it's been 10 years. I gave a faint smile. Yeah, unbelievable, Ethan, I murmured, in the car. He had no idea that dinner would be the appetizer to a battle I'd orchestrated, step by step, silent, sharp, and with no exit path for him. Day one began the moment Ethan left the house with his silver gray suitcase, saying he'd be in Denver for 3 days handling a particularly complex lawsuit. I stood at the door to see him off, smiled just enough, wearing the exact shade of red lipstick he'd once complimented. Say hi to the plaintiff, I said, voice light to the point of detachment. As soon as the automatic gate closed behind his SUV, I turned on my heel, locked the security system with the secondary code, and powered on my encrypted phone. 10 minutes later, the legal team waiting at the Lowell office was ready. My personal financial architecture unfolded like a battlefield map. The outer layer was Sentinel Corp, with subsidiaries in Toronto, Tallinn, and Osaka. The second layer, Ian Technologies, my holding company registered in Delaware before I ever met Ethan. At the core were 3 irrevocable trusts, one specifically designed to ensure that no assets would ever be inherited by anyone with the last name Caldwell. No move should look reactionary, I emphasized. Everything must be framed as standard business operations already in motion. James, our financial structuring attorney, nodded. We'll use the Singapore expansion plan as a lead-in. Asset reallocation, third-phase disbursements, then restructure intellectual property. Cameron added, and the documentation we prepped in March. The board meeting minutes, Asia-Pacific hiring plans, perfect cover. Each action was tucked inside our annual operational flow. I sent out a shareholder meeting notice, citing emerging competition from 2 new firms in Hong Kong and Jakarta. The meeting was conducted online, through a secure, encrypted communication channel. That afternoon, the venture fund I secretly controlled in Tokyo began shifting liquid assets to Sentinel Corp Singapore, disguised as startup cost support for regional offices. Minority shares in several affiliated startups were revalued using IFRS standards, then transferred internally through EM Technologies to streamline the balance sheet. Every move went through 3 levels of review: legal, accounting, and communications. On day 2, I met privately with Ava Lynn, senior counsel specializing in intellectual property law. She used to work at the U.S. Patent Office and knew every legal seam in commercial patent law. We need to establish that Sentinel Corp's core algorithms, including Sentinel Vision and Shadowfence, are pre-marital assets, with no outside contribution, I told her. Ava spread a technical development chart across the table. The original source code is stored in your personal Git archive, time-stamped and IP logged from your old Boston apartment. I nodded. Move all of that into Delaware IP holding. She's still active, right? Fully operational. Clean tax history, no red flags. We completed the filings in 3 hours. IP ownership was reaffirmed internally via a non-valued intra-group transfer. Immune to tax avoidance allegations. On day 3, I showed up at the office like usual, checked in with operations, signed minor contracts, and reviewed marketing briefs, all with an even keel. When Ethan FaceTimed from his hotel in Denver, I smiled, set the phone on its stand, and poured wine so he could see the cozy home scene behind me. Miss you like crazy, he said. Back Saturday. Italian for dinner. Sure. I'm trying to find that black dress you used to love. Once the call ended, I locked down all transmissions. The clock was ticking. On day 4, the tech team sent their report. The spyware on our home desktop had logged 72 hours of fake data. Nothing unusual. Ethan's remote financial monitoring software was still running, devouring the decoy data packets we'd designed to distract him. That night, I called Lisa, a Boston-based family law expert known for making a billionaire surrender 3 beach houses just to keep custody of his dog. The question is, how do I not just keep everything, but make sure he never sees it coming? Liza smirked. Then let me help him screw himself while thinking he's in control. The day 5, our finance team began reshuffling leadership structures at various branches. Cameron signed off on an interim COO appointment in Singapore on my behalf. The relocation from the US to Asia was framed as a supply chain adjustment, due to geopolitical risk. Internal communications announced everything. No one blinked. Day 6, I hired an independent storage firm to migrate all sensitive corporate data off our home network. All infected devices had been sanitized. That same day, I finalized the transfer of non-tech assets into a private asset category. This included my art collection in Florence and equity shares in a Napa Valley vineyard. That night, I received another email from Ethan. Long trip, but thinking of you keeps me grounded. Reserved our place, just us. I opened the drawer and gently pulled out the old ring box. I fitted the sapphire I had reset. Yeah, just the 2 of us, I murmured. Only now one of us isn't blind anymore. On the 7th day, just before dawn, everything was in place. Not a single transfer was delayed. Not one financial route disrupted. The wealth I'd built was wrapped in 3 layers of legal protection, fully shielded from division. Lisa called while I was making coffee. By the time he moves, all the pieces will already be off the board. All you'll need to do is give a little push. I lifted my cup and smiled. Then it's time he thinks he's about to call checkmate. Monday morning, Boston wore a veil of misty rain, just enough to blur the gaze of anyone anticipating something bad. The doorbell rang at exactly 8:13 a.m. I opened it, in a white robe, hands still dusted with coffee foam. A woman in a crisp gray suit held out a document envelope. Ms. Ellie Harper? I nodded. I'm here to deliver official notice from the Suffolk County Court. I took the papers and glanced at the bolded title, Divorce Petition, Plaintiff, Ethan Caldwell. The tiny camera hidden in the doorframe captured everything. The moment I opened the door, the calm expression on my face, and the sound of the door closing behind her. Liza had said, "You need proof that you didn't react emotionally. He thinks you'll crumble. Give him exactly that. Just make it a performance." I opened the packet on the kitchen counter. The wording was razor sharp, like an indictment in disguise. Demands for a 50-50 asset split, claims over profits from the company he called co-founded during marriage, and a detailed list of properties and accounts Ethan assumed were still under my name. One line, underlined in red ink, recommend reassessment of Sentinel Corp and subsidiaries to ensure accurate division. I set the packet down and restarted the espresso machine. Inside, I felt nothing but cold clarity. No rage, no regret. Just the clean finality of a math problem that had taken far too long to solve. By 3 p.m., Ethan returned, unnaturally polished. Pressed suit, shoes shining like a showroom sample. His face held the calm of a man convinced he was running the final play. He stepped into the living room like a lawyer prepping to negotiate with a high-profile client. "I think we should handle this with civility," he said, gently pulling out a chair, setting his briefcase down as though about to open a laptop. "Not end a marriage." I looked him straight in the eye. Of course. Civility's always the prettiest mask for betrayal. Ethan tilted his head slightly, trying to keep cool. This isn't easy for anyone, but Massachusetts law is clear. 10 years of marriage. An equitable split makes sense. I rotated my teacup slowly. Are you sure you've accounted for everything? Yes, I briefly hoped. He didn't answer, just pushed a packet across the table. An asset breakdown, carefully marked. Home value, digital holdings, intellectual property, even 2 years' worth of undistributed dividends. I pretended to read carefully, nodding. Seems you missed the one asset that can't be appraised. Trust. That afternoon, I forwarded everything to my legal team. They contacted the court first thing the next morning, filing a formal response, complete with documentation showing premarital asset separation, time-stamped records, and fully independent financial operations. Ethan's attorney, Garrison, was an old shark, seasoned and cunning, but he hadn't anticipated that most of the assets Ethan demanded had been legally isolated years ago, not as some last-minute defense. On the third day after the petition was filed, I got the first call from Garrison's office. His assistant sounded flustered. Mrs. Harper, the Caldwell firm is requesting clarification about several of your overseas companies. I handed the call to Liza. After a brief exchange, she said, They're panicking. Offshore holdings are invisible. They thought you'd be sloppy. Didn't expect a labyrinth. The next 3 days brought a flurry of awkward moves from Ethan. He filed an emergency motion asking the court to freeze potentially dissipating assets. We countered with board meeting minutes from 3 months earlier, plus the expansion plan we'd already filed with the regional tax office. The motion was dismissed in under 24 hours. Ethan started unraveling. He called 3 times that night, leaving urgent messages. We need to talk. This isn't what you think. I didn't call back. On the 8th day, Garrison filed a motion asking the court for more time to reassess the true value of Sentinel Corp. We replied with a letter from our independent auditor, clearly outlining ownership, cash flow, and full separation of all operations, with no trace of marital intermingling. Ethan showed up that night. His face was different now, no arrogance, just unease. The expensive leather briefcase slipped from his grip and hit the chair. I didn't think it would turn out like this. I stood at the doorway, silent. I just thought. I had a stake. 10 years together. You succeeded, sure, but I was there, Ellie. I replied, slowly. Being present isn't the same as contributing. A light bulb's present in a courtroom, too. But it doesn't get a share of the lawyer's fee. Ethan stepped back. His eyes wavered. In that moment, I saw the truth. He didn't really want a divorce out of pain. He just didn't want to walk away empty-handed. I gently closed the door. I'm not blocking your path. I'm just rebuilding my own walls. On the other side, Ethan stood motionless. He had nothing left to say. No defense, no objection. Just the empty space he once believed would be his entrance to half of what I built. The first summer rain began to fall softly onto the steps. In the thin curtain of water, a 10-month scheme of his was dissolving with every drop sinking into the ground. 3 days after his divorce petition was countered with a stack of documents that stunned his legal team, Ethan returned to the Hudson Valley house he once saw as a prize waiting to be split. This time, there was no crisp shirt or expensive cologne. His face was gaunt, his suit wrinkled, tie loosened. He stood in the kitchen doorway while I arranged teacups and silver spoons like no outsider had ever invaded this life. Ellie, I think I need to stop. I didn't look up. Stop the asset grab? Or stop pretending you're just a disappointed husband? He swallowed hard, his eyes flickering. I was wrong. I admit that. I still didn't look at him. Your only mistake was thinking I didn't know how to play my own game. Ethan stepped closer. I was under pressure, do you understand? Living 10 years beside a genius made me feel like an afterthought. I had no other way to feel equal. I placed the last spoon on the tray, then turned to face him. So, you cheated? Installed spyware on my laptop? Worked with a private investigator in Belize to trace offshore accounts? Then sent back the reports while sleeping next to me? He stayed silent. Then, almost reflexively, he reached out to touch me. I stepped back. And, Rachel, what was she in your little plan to feel equal? Ethan's face contorted. I read every email. The way she wrote sounded like filling out a savings plan. Once it's all done, I'll just move into the Maui villa right away. Ethan collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I've lost everything, Ellie. Not yet, I said, pulling a printed packet from the envelope on the counter. Liza's investigator's full report, screenshots from the spyware, extracted server content, and copies of the overly sweet emails with Rachel. This was just submitted to the State Bar's Ethics Committee. I placed the folder on the table. You might want to start imagining life without a law license. His face turned pale, truly colorless. I didn't feel satisfied, just still. The next day, the law firm where Ethan was a partner officially announced he had been placed on leave pending internal investigation. 3 major clients, a healthcare conglomerate, an investment fund, and a celebrity, immediately pulled their accounts. Garrison, his attorney, sent Liza a message. We propose a private settlement to avoid further unnecessary damage. Liza replied with a single line. My client has nothing to hide. Word of Ethan's suspension spread quickly through legal circles. The initial whispers turned into a name to avoid at meetings and conferences. He called me late one night, voice shaking. They've locked me out of the internal system. I can't access my company email anymore. I hung up without a word. 2 days later, I happened to see Rachel outside the Sentinel Corps office in Midtown, heavily made up but visibly worn down. She was with an older man, salt and pepper hair, flaunting a Rolex. I didn't need a guess. Ethan was no longer her preferred option. That night, I received an anonymous email titled, Hope you're satisfied, she left too. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Liza. For the record. A week later, Ethan was summoned for a closed hearing at the Office of Professional Responsibility. Liza came armed with a full report from my side, documents showing spyware installation, false statements to the court, and unauthorized collaboration with third parties to probe my personal finances. When the hearing ended, Ethan exited through the back. No one walked with him. No assistant taking notes. No camera flashes. His confirmation of Rachel's departure came in action, returning the Audi once under her name, listing the secondary condo in Jersey City, and temporarily moving in with his cousin in Queens. Every financial avenue he once believed would secure victory was now a string of frozen or monitored accounts. Any movement could be interpreted as fraud or privacy violation. I saw him one last time when finalizing the settlement at the law office. His face looked older, temples streaked with gray. After signing, he looked at me, unblinking. Do you really have nothing left for me? I flipped to the last page, nodded to the attorney to wrap up, then looked him in the eye. I gave you 10 years, Ethan. You turned it into the most bitter, failed investment of my life. No one restructures something that's bankrupt in character. He didn't say another word. Just stood there, watching as I walked down the hall, turned left, and never looked back. Outside, snow began to fall gently onto the stone steps. I reached out to catch a flake. Cold, sharp, but pure. For the first time after everything, I felt an unfamiliar calm. No one was setting traps under my feet anymore. I had survived not just with my assets intact, but with my self-respect preserved like a fortress that had just repelled an invader. I left the law office late that afternoon, having signed the final document. The legal process closed with a cold red stamp, but inside me burned a bright fire. My assets untouched, the company never grazed, and Ethan lost everything he thought he could claim. I drove back to Hudson Valley, stopping in front of the house we once called a home. Really, just a glass palace built to reflect Ethan's ego. I stood in the yard, watching the porch lights flick on at their programmed time. The house was spotless to the point of soullessness, as if it had never held schemes and deceit. I called the real estate agent that very night. 3 weeks later, the house was sold to a newlywed couple eager to build a family. I left all the furniture behind except for what belonged to my mother. The old ceramic vase she brought from Montana, and a copy of Women Who Run with the Wolves I had read at 16. I carefully packed those and shipped them to my new penthouse on the 31st floor in Manhattan. The apartment was spacious, with high ceilings and enough morning light that I didn't need to switch on lamps. I no longer filled it with expensive decor. Just 3 things remained in constant sight: a photo of my parents in our backyard, a hand-drawn prototype of the Sentinel Shield system, and a world map pinned with places I wanted to visit. Alone. It took me 6 weeks to allow myself to breathe normally. 6 weeks to relearn how to stand without thinking about anyone else's schedule. 6 weeks to face a mirror that no longer reflected a woman trying to hold a family together, but one who had survived with precision and grace. Then, I met Dr. Eleonora Cross, a specialist in applied psychology known for her work in high-level betrayal recovery. She didn't ask, "How do you feel?" or "Does it still hurt?" She simply opened her notebook and said, "Tell me the moment you started doubting yourself." I didn't answer right away, but in the sessions that followed, I talked about the look in Ethan's eyes when I announced a new project, the calculated stillness in his hugs, and the feeling that no matter how capable I was, it would never be enough to hold on to something fake. "You haven't lost trust," Dr. Cross said in the 5th week. "You're just relearning how to tell the difference between someone trustworthy and someone acting trustworthy." I left it unanswered, but I felt lighter walking out of her office. 3 months after it all ended, I used a portion of the dividends from our Singapore branch, about $20 million, to launch the Foundation for Financial Resilience, a fund supporting women affected by financial abuse in marriage or dependency-based relationships. At the launch event held at the Glass House in Stamford, I stepped on stage, mic in hand, and looked out over the front row filled with CEOs, social advocates, retired judges, and 2 young women from our pilot program. I didn't give details. I didn't name names. I simply told a story in a steady voice about a woman who once believed love was strong enough to withstand strategy, until she realized she was the target of a long-term plan built on trust. "Not everyone who betrays you is evil," I said. "But every betrayal teaches you something blind loyalty never will." The talk ended in prolonged applause. An older woman came up, held my hand, and whispered, "Thank you for saying what so many are afraid to name." I began receiving letters from single moms in Texas, entrepreneurs in Seattle who had just discovered their husbands were siphoning company funds, law students in Ohio who suddenly felt the urge to sign a prenup before marrying someone 20 years older. I replied to each not with lessons but by listening. Every week, I chose one Friday to turn off all devices, step onto the rooftop, brew a cup of lotus tea, and play a piece of classical music. Silence no longer frightened me. It became a companion, never forcing a smile, never betraying what I kept sacred. I began to write again. Not code or project reports, but fragments of personal experience I had once buried. I called them emotional receipts, short reflections on how a woman could emerge from trauma without having to harden her heart. In September, I met Julian Morris, who teaches interactive product design at NYU, during a humanitarian tech conference. There were no fireworks, no rush of infatuation, just one question. If you had to redesign your trust system like a piece of software, where would you start? I smiled. Probably the home screen. It would display, "System unlocks only when the user is actually willing to update." Julian didn't ask if I'd been divorced. Didn't ask how much my company was worth. He asked what I wanted for lunch. And if not that, whether I'd like to take a walk in the park with him. I paused before replying, but I didn't say no. Life doesn't spare anyone from pain. But if you don't let it rot your core, then eventually, you'll rise above it, instead of staying buried in the rubble. I once thought the biggest failure of my life was trusting the wrong person. Now I think, the real failure would have been losing the ability to trust myself after being betrayed. Ellie's story is a powerful reminder that betrayal may break your trust, but it can also spark a fierce rebirth. She not only protected what she built, but transformed her pain into purpose, empowering other women to rise. In the real world, Ellie stands as a model of intellect, dignity, and resilience, a testament that the greatest loss isn't what was taken, but choosing not to rise after the truth is revealed. What do you think of Ellie's choices? What would you do in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more real, powerful family stories that inspire and heal.